Hello, and welcome back to another episode of A Blessing in Divorce. Today, I have a guest, and I'm pretty excited about that. Her name is Cara Murphy, and she has been where you have been or where you are, and she has written a book about it. It's a compilation of stories that she has interviewed a lot of women for, and she's put them all together in this book that is called Intimacy and Narcissistic Abuse Recovery. Now, if you are in my Facebook group, the Separation Club, there will be an opportunity for you to review a PDF for free of this book because she's looking for some heartfelt reviews from women who've actually read the book. So you can get information about that in the group. But for the rest of you, listen in here. She's got some incredible stories to tell, and she's just such a lovely human. And of course, in the show notes, you'll learn all about how you can get the book and how you can contact her, and all the other things. So let's get this episode started. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of A Blessing in Divorce. I am so grateful to be allowed into your headset and day today. My name is Elizabeth, and I'm the host of this podcast and the owner and founder of the Separation Club, which is the club you never wanted to be part of, but the best club to be in if you're going through separation and divorce. Here we talk about how to heal, move forward, and find love if you're so inclined. Also, motherhood through divorce, finding yourself, and creating the life you deserve. Our tools are community, sisterhood, honesty, vulnerability, spirituality, and coaching. And that's when we aren't talking to our experts. I'm also a divorced mother of 4 adult sons, remarried, and a stepmom to 3. So we will be talking about everything that goes with all of that here. If you are recently separated, thinking of separating, divorcing, or even beyond your divorce, but still feeling it, then this is the podcast for you. Hello, and welcome back to A Blessing in Divorce. Today, I have a guest with me. Her name is Cara Murphy. She is a new author who's just written a book about so much of what we all go through here as we go through our separation and divorce or whatever else in the Separation Club. I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have today. So I want to start off, we met basically in my Facebook group, if I remember correctly, because you posted something that I didn't allow. I deleted your post, but as I always do when somebody does that, it's generally because I like to know more. You'd asked for some participation and I wanted to know more, and it's just me protecting the group. But anyway, unlike many, you were very willing to jump into a conversation with me about what you're doing, and I was so fascinated by the book you're writing and your story that I really wanted to share it with everyone. So this is how we ended up here today, Cara. So thank you for being here with me today on the podcast. And
Yeah,
welcome.
yeah. I want to say thank you to you. I was thinking about it this morning how beneficial your group is for people in situations where, they're thinking about leaving their husband or they have left and they just need support. And I was thinking about how the group has sort of it sort of evolves for each person in a way that is it's so similar to the book I wrote. And here's what I mean. I think a lot of people find your group and they don't yet know what they want to say. They don't have
Mhm.
their voice yet. They haven't figured out what's going on. They're wondering, should I leave? Should I stay? What's my plan? And so I feel like a lot of your group members probably sit there and they just watch and
Yeah.
they read the other posts. And then they get to a point where they want to ask a question. I want to say brave enough, but I know they're
Or
all
they feel
brave,
safe.
but
They don't know if it's safe to post or
they
ask,
don't know if
right?
it's safe. Yes, exactly, exactly. And so then they post, and that can last for months and even years, where they're asking questions and they're trying to gather information. And then here's the turning point, and I feel like I just finally reached this point. There's a point where you no longer, I mean, of course, we always still need advice, but you start to give back to the
Hmm.
other group members. It's like, oh, I've been there. I know how that feels. Here's my advice.
Yeah.
Here's what you can do. And it's such a, it's, uh, you know, I'm thankful for social media, but I'm thankful, that you started a group like that because it really, I think, is more helpful than any of us realize. And I was also thinking about, the added element of your group is that you take women on retreats.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that is understood how important that is, because that's the other thing is we get stuck. We get stuck in our lives. We get stuck with the same, patterns and our daily habits. Also, we get stuck in our emotional patterns. And I think you really have to get away from your house and your school and your work and your regular social group and take a trip. And that's going to help, I think that helps women get ahead in this decision making process and in healing from the pain and the grief of their marriages ending. So anyways, I was thinking about all of this morning, and
No,
just wanted
I
to say thank you.
thank you, and I appreciate all of that. There's no question that going away, like to a retreat, for example, takes you when you, like you said, when you're away from your daily grind and problems and responsibilities, it gives you the space to heal and to learn about yourself. And I also believe that books can do that. I generally speaking, admittedly, I'll say fiction will let me do that. Like you get to disappear into another world and you get to just I don't know, just yeah, just drift away into some fantasy place and forget what's going on in your own life. And that can be a very welcome break as well. But you're not writing a fiction book. You're writing honestly a book. I'm assuming it's going to be more of a relatable story that where women can identify themselves. And we'll get into that. I guess just before we jump into the book itself and you tell us more about that, can you tell us a little bit, just give us a little backstory? I mean, I know you have your own divorce story and you don't have to tell us everything, of course, but just a little bit of backstory of what led you here, like what led you into the separation club, what led you to this book. Just a little bit more about that, please.
Yeah, and that's a good question too. And I want to compare it back to the group and how that dynamic works. I think I was thinking about getting a divorce, and I was for years I knew something wasn't right. And so I
Mhm.
had to sit and I had to watch and I had to think about it and I had to learn what I could learn and I had to be incredibly lonely. And I had to do all of the work I could to save my marriage. And then I got to a point where I needed to start really asking questions like what is going on? And I still didn't know what was going on, but I knew how I felt. Um, I knew how I felt, and it was nothing that I had envisioned for my life and my marriage. I felt like I had great friends and I had, a wonderful career and my children. I mean, so many things that I had that were so great, but I couldn't figure out why I felt so much pain in my marriage. And I kept, I mean, how far do you want me to take this back? But I'm a fixer. I've I grew up fixing and definitely a little bit of people pleasing and all of the things that I've learned in therapy. And so I threw that into my marriage. Like if everything else in my life is going so well, this must be something that I'm doing wrong. There has to be something that I can
Hmm.
fix.
Hmm.
And so for years I did that. Um, and then I got to the point where I knew I couldn't do it anymore. Um, and I think a big part of that was my children were growing up. They were becoming teenagers. And someone said to me once, she said, "What would you say if your daughter was in this
Yeah.
marriage?" And it was like a dagger through my heart because I knew what I would say to her,
It's
which
right,
would be
realizing your children are watching you tolerate and put up with and put yourself last and yeah.
exactly. So not only did I know what I would say to her, which is you need to leave, but then the guilt of this is what I'm teaching her, that this
Mhm.
is this is a good enough situation. And so that was my deciding factor. And then since then, I just poured myself into learning because for me, I needed to understand. And I think that's how this book came about is, and especially the stories. Okay, so the book is called Intimacy and Narcissistic Abuse Recovery. And the reason I wanted intimacy in the title is because the more women that I started to talk to, just to get perspective on my own story, but then also to, for us to all share our voices together, when you're in a marriage that you can't understand, it's confusing, you just can't pinpoint what's wrong, you start to find things that you can measure. And the common theme started to be intimacy.
Hmm.
So you couldn't measure the emotional turmoil you were going through, and you couldn't measure the emotional damage that was happening,
Hmm.
but you could write down things like, it's been 6 months since we've been on a date. I haven't received a gift from him for the last 5 birthdays. Whatever. You could write, that's what I was starting
Yeah.
to hear. It's like, I don't know what's wrong with my marriage, but here are the neglectful things that are happening, or here are the damaging, with physical intimacy, here are the scary or damaging things that are
I
happening.
used to measure too, and I
Um,
think you found that in somewhere I talked about that. I'd actually forgotten that I used to track it until you mentioned that you'd heard me talk about it. I used to use a period app, and I didn't measure my period anymore. I used the various symbols. I knew what they each meant to measure times we had, like when we had sex, um, like when how often he said that he loved me. Like I started measuring all these other same thing. I was looking for like, am I just making this up or am I? Yeah. So my
and I
little period app
yeah,
became my.
it's so true. One of the women I talked to, and this story did not make it in the book, but I will save it for a future book. She said that her husband, her ex-husband now, but her husband at the time would withhold his paycheck if
Mm.
she wasn't if so he would he was on the he would force her to sleep with him. So if she wasn't satisfying him to his criteria, to his, then he would withhold their, I think they got it every Friday. And so she said every Thursday night, like clockwork, I would make sure that I slept with him. She said I didn't want to, but I knew that it would stop us from having a fight, and it would just make things go more smoothly.
Yeah.
And so that was her. And so that was her thing. And
Which
so
is,
now she says she has trauma with every Thursday night still after being.
oh my God, and paychecks and there's so much built into that, what she went through those 48 hours from Thursday to Friday, like once the paycheck was in, the constant, yeah, having to, not wanting to, transactional. There's no love there. Like there's got nothing to do with love. There's no intimacy, even though there's an act of something. Um, I mean, I would imagine that dread would build up all week. She probably felt pretty okay Saturday, Sunday, and then it just started building again.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you said that. There was no intimacy. Intimacy, it doesn't just have to be physical intimacy,
No.
it's also emotional. And I think, but that's the part that is so hard for us to understand, um, because you can't measure it. You can't measure the emotional connection. You also can't measure the emotional damage.
I
But
think,
usually,
in sort of patriarchy, if you will, the problem fundamentally is that women need emotional intimacy and men need physical, and it's pretty primal in its origin. Um, and so because a woman's satisfaction from emotional intimacy perspective is not needed for the perseverance or of our race, basically for, you know, um, reproductive reasons, all that's required is that the man is satisfied. A woman's satisfaction is icing on the cake. It's not needed. And so it's never valued. It's not valued legally. It's not valued in many marriages. It's not valued by men because they're not raised to value it. The only value there is ultimately in his satisfaction because that's what's needed to produce a child.
right? Yes,
It's
and
pretty
that's
basic.
yeah, and
And we're still there.
we're still there. And I will say that the beginning of this book, well, first of all, so in the title is Narcissistic Abuse Recovery. But in the very beginning of the book, it was really important to me to point out that you can't diagnose, only a professional can diagnose
Hmm.
who is a narcissist and
Yeah.
who's not. And the problem with that is that you rarely can get someone who is a narcissist to go to therapy. And if they do, especially the covert narcissists, covert would mean they have more hidden passive aggressive traits, they are brilliant at playing the victim card
Yeah.
and using therapy to get tools to then further harm their partners.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing. But then the other thing, bringing it back to emotional intimacy, there are other things, issues, conditions that can really be destructive to emotional intimacy. That can include emotional immaturity. It can include ADHD with I want to say it's reactive disorder, but now I'm not going to remember. It is in my book. Um, it could be that they're on the spectrum, and all of these things are diagnosable, and they are all treatable. Narcissism, there is no known cure. But all of these things can mimic narcissism. You can be narcissistic and be on the spectrum. You can be narcissistic and have ADHD.
Mm.
Well, I wanted to put that in the book because I feel like, number one, we don't want to run around diagnosing people.
Yeah.
Number two, we do need some sort of understanding. I think that's what we go searching for is, I know I've been hurt. I know I tried and tried to make repairs. There's something wrong here. And
Yeah.
I need to understand it, because not only was it an issue in my marriage, but now how do I move forward and protect myself against this thing in the future? Because that's the next step, right? I see that in your group too. People who have gone through their divorces, they're now helping other women, they're offering advice, but then now their questions are, I'm scared to date. What should I do?
Yeah.
What,
They don't
so
want to repeat patterns
they
and
don't want to repeat it. So that's I call that the fourth step. That's the next step that you see in your group.
yeah. Yeah. No, it's we all basically have to go on the same journey. We come into this journey from slightly different places, but ultimately we all have to somehow achieve the same thing, acceptance, healing, and an understanding. And I think an important thing, step that that you mentioned in the beginning, which partly inspired the book, is the education piece. And I mention this often to women is, learn as much as you can. If their ex-partner is diagnosed with something, um, or they think might be diagnosed with something, or think they might be narcissistic, for example, it's not necessarily that important to have the diagnosis, but what's important is to understand the behavior that you're trying to heal from. So when you start to go into the place of learning more about various, I don't know, personality disorders, if you will, or traumatic or sort of abusive behaviors, and you start to recognize, whoa, this sounding an awful lot like what I was going through. I know for myself, it was the education and the understanding of the condition and how they treat people and why this person treated me so badly. Somebody who was supposed to love me and want to be with me for the rest of my days. Um, how did this happen? It answered that question. That how did this happen? Because this person has this issue, or likely has some issues. Doesn't You don't even have to understand why they do it, but they have these issues, and therefore they're doing this. It's not about me. That was really the biggest thing that I took from the education that I got, which I pursued rather, was, this isn't my fault. This would have happened to any partner he has, because this is who he is. Unless he does the work to heal that part of himself potentially, and possibly, get a great gain and understanding of his patterns. But it really, really moved me from a place of, how could you do this to me? Did you ever love me? To, okay, I see why this happened. And this was never about me and my lovability or my worthiness. It was never about that. Um, and I also had to do a lot of learning about my role. I remember when someone, and this was years later, who suggested that I learn more about what it means to be an empath. And because every narcissist needs an empath. Because while I did understand his behavior, I still struggled with, why did I allow it? why did I put up with this? Right. And so learning more about that um, was instrumental in discovering patterns in myself for how I choose not just a future partner potentially, but friends, or how I am around family members who are a bit like that. Um, so it's just, I think the fundamentally there has to be a willingness to be honest with yourself and to look at yourself and to say like, yeah, I was an empath or I'm a people pleaser, um, and to understand what that actually means and how you choose and how you behave and how you respond to things that happen in your life that are difficult, and only then actually can you learn and make a change if you wish to. Then you can look at yourself and go, I don't like that in myself. I don't want to be that person. Now you can change it.
Yeah. I love everything that you said there. I was writing some things down so I can make sure that I touch on them. First is the guilt and also the grief.
Yeah.
So you look back, if you were in a narcissistic relationship or something similar where your emotions and everything else was neglected or abused, it is a longer recovery process than a normal divorce, and
Hmm.
people really need to understand that because you are not just grieving, and I don't want to say just because divorce is hard no matter what, but you are grieving the loss of your marriage, but you're also grieving all of the times that you didn't protect yourself.
Yeah.
And I don't want anybody to feel like I'm saying that it's their fault, but because I know how it feels to be in that situation. I can look back now and say, why was it okay that this happened and I didn't say anything?
Yeah.
And those are not just one-time instances. Those are thousands of times.
Oh, day after day after day, sometimes more than once a day, like
And they're with big
100%.
issues like my marriage proposal. I won't go into details, but it was looking back, I can say, this is the one time, because I don't know that I'll get married again. This is the one time that I got that event, and that event took place in my life, and it was so lacking and not about me. It was about him. And in the moment, I knew exactly what I wanted to say, which was, "This is not. You need to try again." But you question yourself, right? Like, oh, what a terrible person I would be if I told him this is
Yeah.
not a proper
I
marriage for
should
me.
be happy with what's
I
happening.
should be happy. I should be so thankful. And then my fixer, my people pleaser, I don't want to call it a people pleaser. I want to say my fixer because
Mhm.
you touched on the word empath. I tried to put myself in his shoes. It's he's nervous. It's hard to do a marriage. He's
He's
feeling
doing the best he
nervous.
can.
He's feeling anxious. He's doing the best he can. Um, and so I just went with it. But
Hmm.
how many times did we do that? And then there's small, very tiny issues that you could, any other person who hasn't been in a relationship like this would not see as an issue at all. But um, they play on these small things that they know will hurt you. For example, let me give you an example. Um, One of the women that I talked to, she was talking about how she has always been very attuned to her emotions and very attuned to other people. And she kind of prides herself on that. Like she likes to support her friends and she just tries to be emotionally available and regulate her emotions. Her ex said that she wasn't, he said, I'm demisexual. And she said, what does that mean? And he said, I need to connect with somebody on an emotional level before I can be physical, and you're just not doing that for me. So he found that thing that could hurt her the most.
Yeah.
Like, this is
The
how
thing
she
that
sees
she prided
herself.
herself on being.
Right. And now you're not doing that.
Yeah.
I'm going to leave you because you're not doing that for me. So the guilt and the grief and the shame, you have to say goodbye not only to a marriage and a future, the future that you had planned, but you also have to reconcile with the fact that you put yourself in that situation.
Yeah.
Um, and then you talked about also friends. And that's a big part of it too, is that once you start learning all these things, you start hand picking like who is allowed in my space anymore, because you start to see these are the patterns that I had not only with my spouse, but I've allowed other people. Um,
It's usually true. It's not usually just one person. I mean, your spouse is the one who occupies the largest part of your life, um, except for your children and in your emotional life too. So they have the most access. But yeah, we have friends and family members who fall into the same category of personalities, and I think we often don't realize that until we really sit back and look at it. And I about a year and a half ago, I had a friendship, a 15-year friendship, and a very, very close friend of mine. Um, and it ended under the strangest of circumstances. Like it was so unexpected for me, and it all happened in a text argument over 2 days, and then it was over. And it was like definitely a moment of reflection, like what happened? But what I realized upon reflecting was that a lot of the skills, if you will, or the tools that I had learned and the things that I learned about myself when I went through my divorce got applied to this argument, even through the argument, because she refused to get on the phone with me. So this all was happening via text. And she was really lashing out. She was really, and she was hitting, like you said, all the things she knew about me. I consider my integrity to be one of my greater values, and it's certainly one of my core values and what I believe in and want to be in this, show up as in this world. And being honest, you know, people call me, honest to a fault, whatever that means. They make it sound bad to be honest, but um, that's who I am. So what did she say? She said things like, I thought you were a person of integrity and you lied to me and you've been dishonest and you're even lying. She went after all those things. And I remember sitting back thinking, oh my God, she's one of those people. This, I've been up against this before. So instead of, I mean, I couldn't tell you how many texts I wrote out and deleted because I'm like, I'm feeding into it. I'm defending myself. I'm letting her know that she's wrong. That's not who I am. And I thought, no, it's not even relevant here. She's not interested in hearing that. She's made her decision about, what she wants to have happen here. So I actually just dropped the conversation. I tried a couple of things to calm her. And it was obvious to me that she was not interested in that. She was only interested in one outcome, and that was ending this friendship. And she wanted to end it like in blazing glory that she had unloaded this toxic friend out of her life, me. So, I was able to walk away. I didn't say anything unpleasant. I didn't say anything mean. I didn't say anything that I would regret saying. And then I just dropped the conversation. I just stopped responding to her. And it was, I mean, it was hurtful. Don't get me wrong. It bothered me for a long time that it happened, but um, I could, I could feel good about that I had not dishonored myself. And it's because I often talk to my clients about this integrity. So that's one of my values. So people think of, I want to be loyal, and they only think of loyalty to their friends and family, or I want to be someone who's honest and loving, and they think about how they are that to the outside world. But if we're truly a person of integrity or loyalty or whatever it is, we have to do it inward as well. So if I'm a person of integrity and I believe in integrity, so showing up for others as genuine and standing by my values, that's kind of how I see integrity, and being willing to say the things that are needed to be said more than what people want to hear, maybe, and things like that, right? But I have to be willing to do it to me as well. I have to be willing to look at myself and say, well, did I show up for myself today with loyalty and love? And was I staying true to my value of integrity and how I handled this and how I handled like, what was good for me? Being loving is not just about loving the people we love in this world, but it's loving ourselves as we manage our relationships. Like, can you walk away from a fight saying, or disagreement or dispute or whatever, saying, I chose to show up in that fight in a way that I loved and honored myself. So unfortunately, this friendship ended, but I did it from a place that I feel good about, like not righteous, that I feel that I honored myself. I stood by my values and I didn't get petty. And so I'm like, but I remember saying to a friend of mine right after, when I was kind of like unloading how sad I was about this, was that the skills that I learned from my divorce were the ones that carried me through that. It was a friend divorce. That's what it felt like. this was someone who had a significant role in my life. So it was felt.
I you
Not
said
sure how
so
I got
many.
into that story.
No, you said so many wonderful things. Again, I'm sorry that happened. I
Mhm.
think that is a another thing that survivors of narcissistic abuse will experience. Or emotional trauma, or any sort of thing that falls under that realm. As we grow as humans, and let me just tell you, if you're willing to take the journey, if once you get out of the grief stage, and you're willing to really throw yourself into therapy, into groups, into retreats, into reading, into podcasts, the the amount of personal growth you can go through is immense. And they do say that, because if you were in a narcissistic relationship, you were destroyed to such a point, and you were also attached to that narcissist to such
Mhm.
a point. The only way forward is to really truly let go of who you were, destroy who you were. You've
Yeah.
got to now start a whole new understanding and life, and you have to really dig into your past trauma and why you got there. And so, yes, people who are similar, you know, that's the other thing, is that it's rare that you have one narcissist in your life. It's
Yes.
rare. We tend to gravitate towards the same people that are bringing out our issues for
Yeah.
us. We we need that. That's what life does for us. It hands us people who are going to point a mirror back at us and say, this is what you need to heal in your life. And so if we're in the people pleasing and the insecure stage, and the um, you know we accept gaslighting and emotional abuse, and not to say that it's our fault. I want to keep reiterating that it is not our fault. But if we allow that into our lives without knowing, without understanding, there's going to be more than one. And so you're going to watch some of your friend group, some of your family drop off as you go through the healing
Hmm.
process.
Yeah.
Just to put like a light, funny spin on it, I heard this comedian, I can't remember her name, but I was watching her the other day, and she was like, I wish I had stopped therapy like 3 years in, because now that I'm 10 years in, I can't find anybody to date because they all have red flags. She's like, so I wish I would have gone back to being just a little bit toxic so that I would have more men to choose from. And I just thought that was so funny, because it is. You get to a point where you're doing the healing and you start to see all of the patterns that you really need to let go of. And I want to say how much courage it took for you, and how proud you should be of yourself that you handled that in a way that you're able to say, I'm proud of myself. Because that's another thing too, is we
Yeah.
get to the point where we're like, wow, when I was being emotionally manipulated and abused, I would resort to anger with everything. That was my protection. I was just angry at life. I didn't know what was wrong, and I didn't handle a lot of things like I should. And now I'm just like, there's this extreme patience and carefulness, and I just no longer, things don't rub me the wrong way anymore, because I'm able to meet my needs, and I'm able to use the tools that I've started to develop. So that's huge. Um,
No,
and
that's
I want to touch on this before.
yeah, yeah.
You said text. So when you were talking about this
Yep.
friend, you kept writing these texts and deleting them.
Hmm.
To me, this is a prime example of emotional abuse on her side.
Yeah.
When you feel like, excuse me, when you feel like you've done your best to convey what you're trying to say, and you've done it in a way that's respectful and kind, if you will, and they still are fighting, and you're getting more and more confused, you are probably being gaslighted,
Yeah.
which means that they are not going to take accountability. In fact, they're going to make it your fault.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's just a really good thing to notice. If you feel like you're like, maybe if I wrote it in an email, maybe if I left her a voice message, maybe if I wrote a handwritten note, maybe if I said it this way. No, it, This is not your problem. It's not that you don't know how to communicate.
Yeah.
This is her problem
Yeah.
that she's trying to throw it back on you. So anyway, I just wanted to say that. I'm going to grab a drink here.
Well, it's very true. It's very true, and it's something to be aware of as we're communicating with whoever it may be in our life that is doing that kind of behavior. And I think, the ability, one of the things I often encourage uh my clients as well, especially if they're divorcing a narcissist or somebody with narcissistic traits and behaviors, is to ask themselves before they respond, is my response going to change anything here? What is basically the likelihood of this other person agreeing with me when I send this? And right away the answer to that, because the person, like, she was a good enough friend. I knew she wasn't going to agree with me. When that person was my ex-husband, I always asked him, he'd send me the angriest emails just berating me as a mother. And I would, oh, the things I wanted to say. That's not true, blah blah blah, right? Like, you have this whole reaction that you want to put back in an email to that person. But it's like, wait a second, is he gonna read this and go, oh yeah, she's actually right, I should apologize? Well, that's not gonna happen. I knew that before I sent it. Of course I knew that. So it's like, then I'm not sending it. Because why am I responding to this? Because I want to be right. I want this person to hear me. I want this person to agree with me. That's why we're writing back. So it's like, but is that going to happen? No, absolutely not. Then I'm not writing back. I'm not going to subject myself, because they will respond again, even harsher, and you're getting nowhere except extremely upset. So I always ask my clients, like, is there any way that this person that you're writing to or talking to or trying to get something closure from, and people love the word closure, are they ever going to give you what it is you're looking for? Well, no. Then don't ask for it, because when you ask for it, you're putting your heart out there and you're going, please, come on, nurture me. But they're not going to do it. They're just going to step on it.
Mm. I just want to say for the women who are watching this who do keep going back and trying, we've all
Oh,
done that.
yes.
And please, like, I want to give you permission to forgive yourself,
Agreed.
because we've all done things that feel like groveling,
Yep.
begging,
Yep.
just horrible things that bring us down as a human.
And there's nothing wrong in groveling for your family and fighting for your
Exactly.
family and feeling like it's worth one more email or text. But at some point, we have to be honest with ourselves with, I'm only hurting myself now. I'm accomplishing nothing. And so for
Sometimes we have,
self preservation, sorry, that's the word I'm looking for.
yes, sometimes we have to prove it to ourselves.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have to. And I don't want to say that you should go message him or talk to him or try again. I think, but sometimes we have to get to the point that we know, okay, I've
Yeah.
tried every avenue.
Yep.
Now I can walk away from this. No, I can walk away holding my head high, knowing that I gave it everything I had. And that sense of justice, you don't there's no happy ending. This is not going to end in a movie where everybody, lives happily ever after. If you have truly been with a narcissist, you don't get a happy ending.
No,
You have to grieve your life
you will
and you
not be
have to move
friends.
on. And potentially you have to watch them do this to someone else, and it looks like he's living his best life.
Hmm.
And the grief in that is tremendous. And that's also why I think people will try to go back and have themselves heard. We want to feel heard. And, that brings me back to the book. It was cathartic for me to write it, but as soon as I started, I posted a few things on Facebook, like, I'm going to write this. I didn't have the idea that I was going to talk to other women at first. But as soon as I had posted something, women came out of the woodwork, people that I've been friends with forever, that I didn't know what they were going through. And when I would sit down for coffee with them, or I have several that live out of state that I talk to on the phone, they just needed to tell their story.
Yeah.
It's that sense of justice and fairness. They just needed to be heard.
Yeah.
And And I want to take it back to that physical intimacy aspect of it. That's another reason that it's so important for me to put that in there, is that not only do we not have a voice when it comes to, excuse me, I knew I was going to lose my voice. Not only is it hard for us to find our voice when we're in a relationship like that, but it's especially hard to find our voice when there's physical intimacy, neglect, abuse happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's something that we just don't talk about enough as a society. I want to tell you one story. One of the women, she said, this is going to touch, because I know you and I have talked about our stories. She went into her regular exam. She's going to go into her doctor, and she's in her 40s. And the doctor, of course, doesn't know what's happening with this woman, that she's been neglected and her husband wants nothing to do with her because he's cheating, which she didn't know at the time. Anyway, the doctor says, I know you're in your 40s, like she makes a little joke out of it. I know you're in your 40s, but you still could have a baby. So what birth control are you and your husband using? And she says this just it's a normal question that any doctor's going to
Mm-hmm.
ask. But this woman she's been carrying the weight of not having her husband pay any attention to her for years. And it feels shameful, and she's embarrassed, and she just starts crying. And this doctor's like, what's wrong? And she still didn't want to say, my husband won't sleep with me, because who can admit that? That's such a hard thing to admit.
Yeah.
So instead she says, I'm feeling depressed and I'm feeling anxious. And so what happens? Her doctor prescribes her medication for depression. She's not able to say, I don't sleep with my husband. I don't need birth control. He won't sleep with me.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that kind of a thing that I really wanted to bring a light to in the book.
It's, there's many ways to abuse in a relationship, and it, of course, can go both ways. In this particular case, because we're women talking to women, um we're making it sound like it only happens one way. It can go both ways, of course.
Thank you for bringing that up.
But it's also, abuse isn't always in the form of, assault or like, you know, too much. It can also be the withdrawal of, which was partly my story. And I think it was yours as well. And it's, yeah, there's a value that they strip from you. Like, you're not even needed for this. And it is incredibly shameful. And it's yeah, embarrassing. It's just one of those, I used to just pretend like everything was normal with us, and everybody was getting it as much as they wanted, and we were loving that, and that was, I just pretended. So in reference a little bit to what you said earlier about that there's nothing wrong or shameful in being someone who tries one more time or goes after that conversation one more time. Any one of us, you and me, the work that I do, the book that you're writing or have written, and others who work in this field, most everyone who works in this field has gone through it. We've all done the things that we're cautioning people on.
Yes.
And that's how we've gotten to the answers we're at. For someone who's listening to this and thinking, I can't, or I'm not like you, I'm not as strong as the two of you, I can't do that. You can, and you will. You absolutely will one day. Because we know, because both of us, I I mean, the number of times I sobbingly begged for someone to want to, and why not, and allowed this person in response, so they didn't feel attacked, to make it about me. It was my fault. And, and I walked away accepting that for years. It's when it's a hard enough conversation to bring up with the other person, even in the privacy of your own home, and the caution that I exercised in trying to do that, like, I don't want to blame you, and this isn't your fault. This isn't our fault. This is a we thing, not a you thing. And like all the laying down the groundwork so he felt okay before
Yes.
I even said anything. And then I was usually shut down very quickly. Well, if you just didn't do this, then it would be different. And most often it was simply, if you wouldn't have this conversation, maybe it would be different. Maybe we'd be doing it
Yes.
tonight. So it was just my fault. Dismissed, gone, done. The conversation was over. And I was like devastated by these conversations. So I didn't choose to have them very often. I just accepted, smiled, and pretended like it wasn't happening. I lied to myself for years. It was easier.
But who laid down the groundwork for you to feel okay?
Well, that was my job too, I guess.
Yes, right? I mean, you're
And
saying
and
all of the concessions you made for him to make him feel secure
yeah,
and safe, and but if you look back, nobody did that for you. You had to do it for yourself. If you did, you probably, if you were like me, you your focus was on him. How can I
yeah.
make him feel okay? How can I make him feel
Well, it's
good?
codependency 101. If I can make him feel happy and want me more, then I'll be happy too. His happiness, like my happiness, is dependent on his happiness. And even though we don't articulate it like that, I remember learning about codependency years later. That term was not brought to me when I went through my divorce, but it was something I learned more about as I was getting into the work myself. I mean, I'd certainly heard the term, but hadn't fully grasped it until I started learning about it. I'm like, oh, that was me. Everything I did was to make him happy so that I could be happy. I'll be happy if he's happy. If
Yes,
everything will be okay as long as I do this.
yes,
And it's you become a bit controlling in a way because you try to control every moment to make it just right so that everybody can be happy. And then the moment something goes wrong, never mind the fact that you possibly blamed for it, but you blame yourself because you're the one who orchestrated the entire event, whether it be good or bad or a fight or something else. But you've tried to put everything in place and it didn't work, it backfired or whatever. You're not going to blame the other person for their bad behavior. You're going to blame yourself. It's what you do. It's just what you do. Or at
until
least it's what I
until
did, I should say. It's what I did.
no, I think that is. I'm so glad you brought codependency up, and I think you will blame yourself, and he will blame you. You know, if you try to control that word, that's a word that narcissists love to put back on you. You're too controlling because he wants the control, right? He wants to control the situation and control the scene, um, and playing the victim card is huge.
Yeah.
So you might hear things. Of course, the gaslighting is always putting it back on you, right? You're too controlling. You're too bossy. You're too whatever you're asking of them is usually what they project back on you. So if you're telling them, I need more physical connection with you, let's just say that, then he's going to say, oh, but you're not making me comfortable, or you're too controlling, or you're too bossy, or you're too this. He'll put it back on you. Things that you might hear are, you know, if you finally get them to the point where you've almost made a little bit of headway, that's when they're going to be the victim. So I guess I'm just a bad husband,
Yeah.
or nobody can ever make you happy.
Yeah.
Um, you're
Oh, I
just
guess
such
I'm
a.
just a horrible person.
I guess I'm just a horrible person. And the problem with that kind of argument is once a person makes a statement like that, for us who are, had issues in codependency and people pleasing, at the beginning, we're going to say, oh my gosh, I've made him feel terrible. Maybe I am. Maybe there is something wrong with me. Maybe I am controlling. Maybe I am bossy. Maybe I am too pushy. Maybe I am this. And for anybody who's in this situation right now and any of this is resonating, I want to just tell you, take a step back and look at the other relationships in your life. Look at the healthy ones and ask yourself, am I like this in those? And the answer is probably no.
Yeah. Are you like that with your children? Are you like that with your best friends? Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right? It's probably no. Um, and you said something else that value. I wanted to talk about value. We've done a lot of work to heal. I'm still very much in the healing process. Like this, it will take years, I believe. Um, and I want to say I want to touch upon what you talked about. If women see us and are like, oh, you guys are stronger than me, or you, whatever, trust me, we've all been at the bottom of the shower crying, laying
Mhm.
there sobbing so our kids don't hear us. I mean, it's I think the grief and the devastation that you feel once you start to unpeel the layers of what has happened to you is it can feel overwhelming. And something that someone said to me once is, it's like a wave. It's going to recede. Even if it comes in like a tidal wave and you're like, I am going to drown, this is going to kill me, it's going to recede. So you
Yeah.
need to just keep swimming. You need to keep catching your breath. And by keep swimming, that means rely on your friends, go to the gym, eat healthy foods, sit there and meditate, curl up in your bed and cry, whatever it is that just keeps you going, because it will feel so immense, um, that you don't feel like you're going to survive it. And it will recede. It will come again, probably, right? Those waves start getting, they keep coming, but they do start getting smaller. Um, and another thing that I heard was, if we were handed all the pain all at once, it probably would kill us.
Hmm.
And so, coming out of an emotionally abusive relationship, you have to take it just one little thing at a time. I want to just do it like I've been watching Lisa Turkhurst on YouTube. She wrote Forgiving What You Can't Forget. She's brilliant. I would highly recommend listening to some of her story and listening to her talk. But um, she said her husband cheated on her. She said if she would have been handed every single bit of information all at once, all of the cheating, all of the scandal, all of the stuff that she went through, she wouldn't have survived it.
Hmm.
And so at first it felt like, oh my gosh, it's been 1 month and now I'm finding out about another one. And now it's, 6 months and I'm finding out about another. But looking back, she's like, I was handed it in little incremental bits that I could tolerate. And
Which is
that's how,
probably why the first month or two is so awful, because that is probably when you're being flooded with whatever the circumstances are, with the most information. There's the most devastation happening in those first weeks and months. And then, yeah, things settle down. Everybody settles down, and there's a breath that can be taken. Um, so that makes a lot of sense. I like that. We're given what we can handle. Uh,
I will say though, the co-parenting aspect for the women who are listening to this who have children, once you've started to unpeel that onion or whatever you want to call it, you've started to really learn what's been happening to you. Um, Co-parenting can be really hard because you're now aware of the abuse, and so now you have to deal with this person, um, and you're going to continue to he's going to continue to try to hurt you. Um, and so that can be a really difficult part of the healing journey as well. If you don't have children and you can go no contact, that's what therapists recommend. Just no contact means no social media, no talking to friends about his friends about him. You have your own group of friends. If you can move to a different town, move to a different town. Um, and then with co-parenting, they say practice gray rock. You can look that up, but it's basically being as emotionless as a gray, boring rock.
mhm.
He asks for a schedule change. You say, sure, made it, done. Limit your contact to email if you can. No
Yeah.
phone calls, no.
Keep every and there's actually apps now that uh you can use for, like, they can use for communication and scheduling, and so there's one schedule and everybody can see it. It also doesn't allow for name calling and that kind of stuff, so it's and I believe they can even be set up to not allow too frequent of texting, and like, so basically contact me when necessary only. But you're right. I mean, co-parenting, we've chosen to have children with this person, then we're going to be dealing with them potentially forever. Certainly through the years that our children are dependents. And I mean, we're opening a whole other door here, so I think we'll just not
Yeah, yeah,
fully
sorry.
walk through it. But I think, you know, in those cases, healing and finding your own footing is even more important, and in fact has to sometimes happen a little faster, because you got to get your feet on the ground, and you got to find a place that you can function from as a parent and as a co-parent without falling apart constantly, because I certainly hear from so many women who are so constantly and additionally devastated by the way they're treated by their co-parent. it's just this constant reminder of disrespect and of, that they are done with you, and they remind you and they go on about how happy they are, and whatever. So, and like you said, they're just still trying to hurt you. You need to put yourself in a place where they don't get to do that anymore, even as a co-parent. I was able to do that, and but yeah, it's a painful process as well. It's a separate one and it's a painful one. So um, now let's get back to your book quickly. We've touched so much on like our thoughts, and obviously a lot of these are in the book. Um, who would you say the book is for? As women who are listening, if they're wondering, I wonder if I want to read her book, which I'm sure they want to by now. But if you were to just say, like, who specifically is this book for? What's she asking herself? What's she wondering?
I wanted to write this book because I spent too many years researching and not finding anything. Um, I don't want, I'm not going to go deep into my own story, but mine was very much one of neglect, very much neglect, especially physical and emotional. I mean, that's the, yeah. And I didn't want to talk to anybody about it because I was so ashamed.
Hmm.
And so I would Google, why doesn't my husband want to hold my hand? Why doesn't my husband want to sleep with me? Why doesn't, and you could listen to podcasts and read books, book after book on
How
women
to
who,
rekindle and how to bring the passion back.
sure, that, but you would mostly hear about, they were mostly written for men whose wives had just had babies, and maybe she's not
Uh,
feeling as sexual as she was before. And I felt like I might be the only person on earth who was going through that, and there was nothing out there. And so then I really started to think about, how do we tell this story, and am I brave enough to tell this story? And because I can already hear in my own mind, let's just say this is in my own mind, well, maybe you just weren't good enough, or maybe you just weren't sexy enough, or maybe you just weren't pretty enough, or maybe you weren't nice enough. I'm already doing that to myself as I sit there and just say this. And so the book started out more for myself, but when you first asked me that, now it's become so much more. I just sent it to one of the women who her story is in the book, and she wrote back and she said, you captured things in words that I've wanted to say out loud for so long. She's like, I don't know how you did that. She's like, I don't even know how you understood how I felt. And so for me, it's that. It's just
Finding a common voice.
finding a common voice and giving
Yeah.
voice to something that's really, really hard for people to talk about.
And it's validating. So, I mean, I would say then that it sounds like it's for women who are wondering if they're going crazy because
Mm.
they just can't find this happiness, or wondering if they're right to leave, a marriage that is so deeply unsatisfying, I guess, or not nourishing and not loving. Is that a good enough reason? Does anyone else do that? Like all those. So I think, yeah, for those women who are sitting alone, wondering if they're going crazy or if they're doing something terrible, um, this book sounds like it could be really something to help you find um, a voice and validation, and realize that no, you're far from alone. Like there's so many stories. So thank you for answering your own call, I guess, to find those voices and put them together in a beautiful book. And I can't wait to read it when it's finally out and we can, I'm looking forward to that. So, well, okay. So as I'm recording this, the book is not out yet, but as you listen to this, the book is out.
It's about a week
Um,
away, so.
yeah, I know. It's like she's just basically getting ready to put it out there. It's just in the very final stages. So as you're listening to this podcast, all the information on how to buy her book will be in the show notes below. all of Cara's her bio, her website, her contact information, and her book will be in the show notes below this episode. And I guess is where will they be able to, like, what kind of places will the book be for sale?
So it will be on Amazon.
Great, perfect.
And I want to say that this is going to be the first of many. I wanted to tackle this huge monumental task of, what narcissism is, what emotional abuse is, how to survive it, what to do, how to thrive. And it's going to be broken up, it needs to be broken up into more books. So part of the book has bonus material that,
Okay.
like a quiz, is he a narcissist? It has something about healing your vagal nerves, which it talks to you about what those are and some exercises you can do. And so you'll be able to, with those bonus materials, you'll be able to get on my mailing list and you'll know about the other books.
Wonderful.
And so I wanted to say that. I also wanted to go back to, when you said this book is for people who are feeling a little bit confused. I just want to just throw out this last tip, and you and I talked about it at the beginning. Write things down.
Yeah.
You don't have to talk to anybody if you're not ready. You need to start keeping track so that you can separate yourself from the emotional confusion and you have hard facts in front of you. This is what happened here. This is how I felt. Then he did this. This is how I felt. I would say, especially if you think you're dealing with a narcissist, has he apologized? And if he did, have his behaviors changed? And if you start keeping track of that, you'll see he doesn't apologize. Or if he does, he doesn't try to change. He's just going to do it again in a week or 2 weeks or whatever. So I just wanted to put that out there. That's
No,
a
I think
great
that's
way
amazing that that you've added the bonus materials. And I think again, like we said in the beginning, it's about education. The more you know, the more you understand their behavior. You understand that the behavior is theirs. It's not because of you. The only control we have over this is our reaction to it and the choices that we make because of it. I spoke to somebody else on my previous guest that I had on the podcast here, Rachel. Uh, she said something that I thought was so valuable because she said it's not so much about the behavior, like the labeling the behavior, whether they're narcissists or they're this or they're that. Ultimately, it's understanding the behavior that caused the trauma in you and the pain in you, and so that keeping a bit of track, like you're talking about. It's the little things, like even when they apologize and you don't feel any better because the apology actually isn't about, I'm sorry, I did this hurtful thing to you. It's more about, oh, I'm sorry, I just felt so, as soon as it comes a but or now they're actually justifying what they did anyway. So it isn't an apology anymore. It's tracking things like that so that you can say to yourself when they're telling you that you're crazy or demanding or you're too much or too little or too whatever, you can look at your sheet. And this is not necessarily a legal document by any means or something that you can even bring into the legal aspect of your divorce. You're doing this for you. You're doing this for your healing so that you can look at it and go, I'm not crazy, at least to yourself. They're not going to care, but you can say to yourself, I'm not crazy. I've been tracking this. What I'm saying, what I know is I know the truth. I know my own truth. And I think I know for myself, being able to say to myself, I know what happened. I know my part and I know his part. And I think, in fact, and I know that him knowing that I know what he did, if that makes sense, is part of why he hated me so much after the divorce, because there's one person on this earth who knows what he really did, and that's me. So he had to do and say whatever he could to invalidate me, and I'm crazy and I'm this and I was accused of being a narcissist and then child abuser, and oh my God, if he could think of it, I was accused of having an affair. He had the affair. Like, it was just ridiculous. But it was really all just a strategy, which is very typical of narcissists, as you've mentioned, to make me the person in the wrong, because that's what he needed in his mental illness. Um, my healing comes from the place that I know the truth. I know the truth, and that's all I need to know. I don't care if he knows. I don't care if he admits it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't change the facts. So I think the tracking can help maintain your sanity, because when they're accusing you of 8,000 things, you can look at your little period tracker and go, no, I'm right, because there's only one heart every 2 months, and there's only two of these in the last 6 months, and there's only it just helped. It really helped me.
And it's also important when you've left the relationship and there's a big part of you that will start to remember. It's called euphoric recall. You'll start to remember all the positive things that they did,
Yeah.
and you'll want to go back. And this is when you'll do the things like, oh, I wish we could, whatever. You'll do things that you'll have communication with him that you wish you wouldn't. It's helpful to have those things written down so you can remind yourself,
Yeah.
this is not something I want to go back to. This is something that was very harmful to me.
And as much as I knew that things were so wrong with us, and my tracking proved it, when I met someone, I started tracking again. I couldn't help myself. And then I realized within a couple of months, I don't need to track. Like it was incomparable what my tracking used to look like compared to this tracking. And so it's just like, this is ridiculous. Like I'm having to track too much. And I'm not just talking about sex, because I was tracking all kinds of things, like I love yous and affection and
Yes.
but it's for your own sanity. So yeah. Anyhow, we've talked for a long time today, Cara.
Yes,
We obviously need
thank
to do
you.
this again. My solo episodes are usually about half an hour, but my guest episodes are always longer, and I think it's such a valuable conversation, and I know my listeners really enjoy when I do have guests on. So thank you for being here and sharing your book, your journey, your story. We have to talk again, definitely when you start writing more books. But thank you so much for being here. Like I said, everything to buy the book and all the information you want about Cara will be in the show notes below. And I wish you so much success with this book. And thank you for doing this for all of us.
Thank you for everything you do, Elizabeth. Thank you so much.
I loved that conversation. And Cara is just such a pleasure to speak with. She is it just feels so wonderful. You always feel like you're talking to your best friend. So I really hope you pick up her book. If any of the conversation we had today resonated with you, then this book has been written for you. If there's one big thing I want you to take away from this is, books are great. And I think a book like this one, it is perfect for to validate and make you feel seen and give you a voice, and kind of helps you feel kind of normal. It makes you realize that this happens. This is not just you. You're not going crazy. You're not exaggerating. You're not, people might not understand who have never gone through this, but there are people who do understand. And also know that regardless of what the people in your life understand or don't understand, your story and what you went through, and it's the truth. It's your truth. And it's through reading stories like in the book that Cara has written that we can find ourselves or some resonance in other people's stories as well. Hearing how they may be managed can help us. So when you read a book like this and you're nodding your head and you're relating and you're crying and you're feeling all the things and you feel so seen and heard, and it's wonderful, in order for that to create real healing in you, it is so important to sit down after an impactful chapter or story and do some journaling and really look at, how can I bring this wisdom into my heart and into my being and into the choices that I make and the decisions that I make? How can I bring this into my life? How can I take what I'm learning and what I'm feeling right now and change something about how I move forward? Because there's nothing we can do to change what happened in the past or what that other person did. And we can't change even how people will behave and treat us in the future. The only thing we can change is ourselves and the choices that we make and how we respond to other people and what they choose. So use a book like this, or any of the books that you might read, to learn and to also integrate what you're learning. A great way to do that is also with a coach. So I'm just going to throw my hat in the ring here quickly and say, you read this book, or you read any number of other books that we've talked about here or that you've heard about and that you've read. I challenge you to turn it almost into a workbook, like a class you're taking on healing. And if you need help with that, that's what I'm here for. That's what coaches are for. It's an opportunity to sit down and sit down, like, what should I be asking myself? I so saw myself in that story, but now what do I do? How do I make sure this doesn't happen to me again? How do I make sure I don't repeat patterns? So when you learn about yourself, that's a cue to you. It's, to do the work, to heal that part of you, and to, in a way that helps you make different choices in the future. So, it's not enough to read a book. Nothing changes just by reading a book. It changes because you start doing things differently. And I want to help you with that. So I'll put my information below, but I hope you will seriously consider whether you work with me or someone else. That's up to you. But please do as much as you can, because that's how we move forward. That's how we grow as human beings. That's how we heal. And that's how we create beautiful, gorgeous, joyful lives for ourselves. So I wish you all of that. And you can get all the information about this episode, about Cara and her book, and about my coaching in the show notes below. I wish you the most beautiful day.